Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I've just killed my wife.
You just killed your wife?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bit different for you tonight, I expect. Happy New Year.
Okay, and how have you killed her?
Suffocation, really, I guess. Bit of a bizarre situation, but, never mind.
Okay, is it just the two of you in the house?
Well, just the one of us now.
Right, okay.
Yeah, well, two, yeah.
Okay, is there any other sort of issues that the officers need to be aware of when they come into the house? Is there
no, not really. I'm not violent, I'm not nothing.
Okay. Stephen, can I just get you to go and answer the door? I believe we should have some officers there. Are you able to just go and speak to them?
Okay, they're here now, are they?
They should be there.
Well, I'm on my way.
Okay.
I'm on my way as we speak.
Okay.
Hello. Oh, hello, buddies. How are you, all right? Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, okay.
Just 5 days after Christmas in 2017, at 10:19 p.m, Suffolk police received what they later described as one of the most bizarre 999 calls they had ever received. Anne Searle calmly explained to police that he had killed his wife in their suburban house in the sleepy Suffolk town of Stowmarket. When paramedics arrived, 62-year-old Anne Searle was found unresponsive, and despite their best efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Anne had been strangled by her husband of 45 years before suffering from a fatal cardiac arrest. When police arrived, he joked that he had been a very naughty boy, and sometimes you've just had enough. Stephen claimed it to be in self-defense, and that Anne had come to him with a steak knife. But how could someone who had accidentally killed their wife of 45 years and the mother of their children joke so casually after her tragic death? Stephen and Anne met in Glasgow in 1972 and married in December of that year. Anne was christened Jessica Ann, but would go by her second name and would be known by friends and family as Anne. She was born in Arbroath, a large town in the east of Scotland, which lies on the North Sea coast, about 26 kilometres from Dundee. Her family would then move to Glasgow, which is where she would later meet Stephen. Stephen was part of the Royal Marines and stayed there for 30 years. The couple would move a lot due to Stephen's military job and would have 3 sons, Gary, Christopher and Stephen Jr., nicknamed Stevie. After Stephen retired from the military in 1993, they moved to Suffolk, where they became pub landlords for the Stag Tavern. Everything appeared to be going well, the relationship was happy and the pub was thriving. Anne Searle was said to be the glue that kept the family together. Her son Stevie reflects on his childhood, saying the family grew as a tight unit. She was the backbone of the family. Stephen, on the other hand, was described by individuals as being obsessed with the military and military matters, the army and the Royal Marines. He had grown up in a macho environment. He was obsessed with bodybuilding and his appearance. He was taught unarmed combat, how to keep fit, and he was a very powerful man. After leaving the Royal Marines, Stephen was still determined to be the man in charge. Once they moved to Stowmarket in Suffolk to run their pub, he became very well known locally and over time became extremely politically ambitious. Stephen therefore became a UKIP councillor at Suffolk County Council from May 2013 to May 2017 and a general election candidate in June 2017. And he was good friends with the leader of the UKIP party at the time. His son Stevie idolised his father, looking up to him as a good man and a great granddad to his children. However, behind closed doors, Stephen was incredibly controlling and abusive in his marriage to Anne. As police carried out their investigations to determine if there was a reported pattern of abuse within the marriage, they discovered one significant incident that was reported 20 years previously. In 1997, when the couple were in their pub, the Stag Tavern, Stephen had grabbed his shotgun and pointed it directly at Anne during an argument. He then turned his firearm to the wall and shot several times. Gunshots are very uncommon in the UK, and neighbours were immediate to call the police, who came straight away to the scene. After talking to both Anne and Stephen, they came to the conclusion that there was no serious offence that had taken place. No doubt Stephen's high standing in the community as a pub landlord and his previous service in the military helped to convince police that this was just an innocent accident. Police chose not to follow up the incident, proving to Stephen in a way that he was untouchable. Stephen saw this incident as an opportunity for him to taunt and threaten his wife. He would constantly remind her of the traumatic event, and even went as far to draw a smiley face on the wall with gunshot holes for eyes.
The incident itself was horrific. The fact that he revelled in that was again another example of him reminding people of how much in control he was, the fact that he could use violence.
Police would later say that this incident helped to establish in the marriage the control that Stephen had over Anne, and that even the most traumatizing of events, such as threatening her with a gun, would go unpunished.
Yes, narcissistic, very much self-centred. That came out in all of the work that we did to understand his lifestyle. It was all centred around him.
The incident led to a pattern of abuse in the marriage, most of which would go unreported by Anne. There would be some instances of Anne telling colleagues and friends that she was a victim of domestic violence, even showing bruises she had received at the hands of Stephen on some occasions. But as is often the unfortunate reality with victims of domestic abuse, Anne felt trapped in the marriage and was too scared to leave. She also had her 3 sons to protect. 10 years later, the police would be called out once again by Anne, who accused Stephen of trying to push her down the stairs. Again, nothing came from this reported incident. Anne resorted to alcohol, and it soon became known amongst friends and family that she struggled with alcoholism.
Anne was a battered wife, was a victim of domestic violence. This was a woman who over the years had shrunk and shrunk and shrunk until she was a shadow of her former self.
In addition to physical and emotional abuse from Stephen, Anne began to suspect, later in the marriage, that her husband was not being faithful. She would check his phone in an attempt to catch Stephen, and in the summer of 2017, her suspicions were confirmed when she learnt of Stephen's affair. This affair would send shockwaves through the family, not only due to the betrayal to Anne in itself, but also due to the woman who was involved. Following Stephen's retirement from the Marines in 1993, he had several jobs, including pub landlord, counsellor, and in 2005 he was working at a bowling alley alongside his older son Gary. Also working at the bowling alley was his much younger colleague, Anastasia. In her mid-20s, Anastasia had Stephen captivated, and he grew an unhealthy infatuation for her. Anastasia, however, had her eyes on Gary, Stephen's older son, and Gary and Anastasia would soon become a couple, fall in love, and have 3 children together. Despite Anastasia now being the mother of his grandchildren and his son's life partner, Stephen was determined to get Anastasia through any means possible. The police would label his fixation on Anastasia as a concerning obsession, with instances like photoshopping her face onto pornographic images.
This infatuation almost becomes an obsession for him.
Stephen first tried to seduce Anastasia through pity, inviting her to his council offices for a coffee and expressing how lonely he was and how he hadn't had a sexual relationship with his wife in years. Anastasia found these advances ridiculous and appropriately rejected him. She was loyal to her partner Gary, and she did not see her father-in-law in this way. Stephen then changed his tactic and tried to impress her with images of himself from his youth, during his bodybuilder days, and other sexual images of himself. Eventually, in April 2017, Anastasia gave in to his advances, and the pair started a sexual relationship. She would later go on to say that she was in a vulnerable state due to the death of her grandmother, and she found Stephen to be persistent and manipulative. The pair would share sexual images and messages over the phone, with Stephen saving Anastasia as SGB, Steve's beautiful girlfriend. The affair would continue in secret for 2 months, with the couple meeting in secret under the pretense of Stephen helping Anastasia's son, who was in the cadet troop that he ran. Anne quickly became suspicious of Stephen's behavior, noticing his increasing absence and secrecy around his phone. After guessing his password, she was devastated to discover the series of explicit photographs and texts shared between her husband and an SGB. Anne had no idea that SGB would turn out to be part of the family. Anne bravely confronted her husband, but he went on to admit the affair was with a man. After confronting her son Stephen Jr. in tears about the affair, he would then go on to call his father, who explained he was in fact with a woman called Debbie from Newmarket.
My mum called me whilst I was at work, saying that he was having an affair with a man, which wasn't true. It actually turned out he was having an affair with another woman called Debbie from Newmarket.
This lie would all come to a shocking conclusion when the family learnt of the affair in June 2017, a truth which would shatter the family and particularly devastate Anne.
It is what it is, it happens, so this is the worst thing you can think of, for something like that to happen, and obviously it's a heavy thing to go through, to find out that sort of thing's happened in your family. Pretty shady, it's pretty heavy, it's dark.
The family tried to move forward after this bombshell revelation, with Gary even forgiving Anastasia for her affair with his father. Anne, however, could not forget or forgive. She described herself as being trapped in a soul-destroying marriage. She even confided in a colleague that after 40 years of marriage, the betrayal she had felt was too great, and there was no way to recover from this situation. Stephen carried on pursuing Anastasia, tracking her down even after her and Gary had changed their numbers. He carried on with his obsession, neglecting his wife of 4 decades and seemingly not caring what the affair had done to the family. Following the affair, Stephen and Anne's relationship would not recover. They would argue every night, with Anne even confiding in her daughter-in-law Victoria that Stephen had threatened to kill her. The tumultuous and volatile relationship would all come to a head in December of 2017. Anne's colleagues would describe Anne as optimistic at this time of the year. She was trying to work on her marriage and focusing on her health and well-being. She'd lost weight, gave up smoking, and had a general more optimistic attitude. Despite Anne's attempts to save her marriage, Stephen put in no such effort. He bought Anne a cheap present from Asda and even decided to throw away the Christmas dinner Anne had worked so hard to make during an argument. It is understood that there were continual arguments around this period of time, with some becoming physical. Anne had even shown bruises to her colleagues, indicating the violence she was experiencing at home. Heartbreakingly, Anne wrote on Facebook on Christmas, "Happy Christmas to you all. Hope you are all doing well. Have a good day. I hope I'll still be here in 2018. We will see." Anne undoubtedly feared for her life. However, little did she know, she would not be around to see in the new year. Just 5 days after Christmas in 2017, Stephen and Anne were home alone and had been drinking. This was typical behavior for the couple, who were described as regular drinkers. However, there was nothing regular about that night. An argument broke out as usual, but one that quickly got violent. During the argument, Stephen claims that Anne had come to him with a domestic steak knife, and in an act of self-defense, he strangled his wife to death. His wife, of over 4 decades, was callously killed at the hands of her husband. Following her death, Stephen called 999, upon which he told the police in what was described as a calm manner that he had killed his wife.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I've just killed my wife.
You've just killed your wife?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bit different for you tonight, I expect. Happy New Year.
Okay, and how have you killed her?
Suffocation, really, I guess. Bit of a bizarre situation, but, never mind.
Okay, is it just the two of you in the house?
Well, just the one of us now.
Right, okay.
Yeah, well, 2, yeah.
Okay, is there any other sort of issues that the officers need to be aware of when they come into the house? Is there
no, not really. I'm not violent. I'm not nothing.
Okay. Stephen, can I just get you to go and answer the door? I believe we should have some officers there. Are you able to just go and speak to them?
Okay, they're here now, are they?
They should be there.
Well, I'm on my way.
Okay.
I'm on my way as we speak.
Okay.
Hello. Oh, hello, buddies. How are you? All right? Yes, I'm well, thank you. Yep, okay.
It was a challenging call to hear, and I remember as a team us listening to it together and being really surprised by the content, but even more surprised by his attitude and behaviour within it.
Officers arrived at the scene of the murder whilst he was still on the phone to operators and showed them straight to the body. The arresting officers noticed Stephen had a bandage on his hand, and he told them, "She tried to get me in the stomach first, but I only had a couple nicks." He later went on to say, "What the fuck have I done?" Officers on the night described him as being hugely disrespectful, insensitive, and showing no emotion whatsoever. The fact he was able to joke on the 999 call and even saying, "Never mind," when talking about his wife's murder is truly shocking. Police have gone on to say in interviews that they have never heard such a bizarre 999 call. The question remained, was it indeed self-defense? While Stephen confessed early on to the murder and even showed police the body, he maintained his innocence by stating he was acting in self-defense. The post-mortem assessment carried out in the new year found that Stephen waited an hour before ringing 999. DCS Bridger was the officer in charge of understanding the relationship between Anne and Stephen and the rest of the complex family dynamics. He remained skeptical about the self-defense argument.
I listened to a man who had clearly been involved in a violent act, had waited best part of an hour before reporting the fact that someone had been seriously hurt, and then who, whilst having made those early disclosures, was immediately trying to backtrack from his blame within it, which was evident for all to see and obviously played out in the trial.
Pathologists concluded that Anne died of cardiac arrest after having been held in a chokehold for some time.
A chokehold is basically where you cut off somebody's method of breathing in order to subdue them. What's happening here is that you're crushing the windpipe so somebody can't breathe. That induces complete terror.
During the trial, the pathologist said she would have lost consciousness after about 8 to 15 seconds of pressure to her neck and died after further sustained pressure for a period of minutes. Jurors were also shown a knife with a 12cm blade that was recovered from the couple's home. The knife was shown in court to have both their DNA on it. The trial was held in Ipswich Crown Court in July 2018, where Stephen had been charged with the murder, and the trial lasted just 6 days. The burden was on detectives to show that the murder had been intentional rather than an accident, which was the key argument from the defence. During the trial, the jury were very skeptical that Stephen had acted in self-defence. It was obvious he was a manipulative man, with a history of abuse and violence. It was discovered in court that the part of the training he would have received in the Marines included how to do a chokehold. Unconsciousness would have happened quickly, so prosecutors emphasized that Stephen did not have to carry on squeezing her until she died. If it was indeed an act of self-defense, why did he continue squeezing her after she was unconscious? Why did it take him an hour to ring 999? There was no evidence that he had tried to revive Anne, training which he also would have received during his military days. After a 6-day trial, the jury came back with a guilty verdict after just 3.5 hours of deliberation. After the verdict, Stephen's son Gary said, "I just couldn't believe the man I absolutely idolized and worshipped had done something like that to me." His other son, Stephen Jr., said,
The part that hurts me the most is I lost my mum, but the person who took my mum away was also my best friend, who was my dad. So now it's time to focus on my family and my kids and do the best I can for them.
The judge, Mr. Justice Green, reflected on the waves of pain and anguish that his actions have sent through the family.
I've broken my bones before, but that broke me. To find out that my dad actually killed my mother.
Stephen was sentenced to minimum 14 years in prison. The UK Criminal Justice Act of 2003 outlined a sentence of minimum 15 years for murder. However, mitigating factors helped reduce Stephen's sentence. These included no previous convictions, a prostate cancer diagnosis, and because Stephen had been a useful role in the Royal Marines. This meant his sentence was reduced to 14 years. During sentencing, the judge said, "By your own hands you have brought grief and distress untold upon your family. You have deprived your children of the mother that they loved. You have deprived your grandchildren of their grandmother, and you have deprived Anne of the remaining years of her life." He added, "I think that it must go without saying that your actions have caused devastating waves of pain and anguish to crash through your entire family. No sentence that I impose can ever undo that suffering." Stephen was emotionless and did not make eye contact with anyone as he was sentenced to his minimum 14 years in prison. Following the sensational trial, the former leader of the UKIP group at Suffolk County Council caused outrage when he told a reporter at the BBC that these things happen and that Anne Searle was fundamentally a decent man. He said these statements in an interview for BBC Radio Suffolk, saying that these things happen, they are most unfortunate and tragic, but I don't think we should pass judgment on people. This caused outrage in the community, with the anti-domestic violence charity Safe Lives saying his statements were incredibly harmful and sadly all too common. Domestic violence is such a serious threat to sadly many people. It's so outrageous that people can so easily diminish such a serious and dangerous thing, brushing it aside and pretending it's not occurring, and protecting the abusers rather than the victims. Anne Searle was trapped in a horrible marriage with such a dangerous man, and she knew that her life was in danger. Stephen Searle only thought of himself. He wanted his son's partner, Anastasia, so was going to get her no matter the consequences. He neglected his wife and did not think of the impact this affair would cause on his whole family. It's heartbreaking that Anne could not get away from Stephen, and that it had to end in this way. Stephen not only made his wife's life a misery, but took it away from her. He also took away the mother to his own children.